Lucia walked out of the gates of the old military barracks, the rusty iron door closing heavily behind her. The young soldier on duty didn't even bother to look up as he said, "No one by that name has ever worked here, Senora." His voice was devoid of feeling, as if he were denying not just a name, but the last hope of an aging woman. She didn't reply, only nodded slightly. Her sunken eyes were beyond tears. Her feet dragged on the cracked cement, each step echoing the pain that had been simmering for a quarter of a century. The old car was parked on the side of the road. Lucia opened the door, placed her bag on the passenger seat, and then rested her forehead on the steering wheel. Outside, the June sky in Chihuahua was brooding, like a lingering nightmare. Inside the car, there was a silence that suffocated every breath. A rare tear slipped down her cheek, touching the collar of her faded gray shirt. In that stillness, memories flooded back. Manuel, the man she had loved as if there were no one else in the world. His thick hair often tousled in the morning. His deep, warm eyes, and the way he would laugh in the kitchen, one hand fiddling with the electrical wiring, the other holding a small radio playing an old country song. Their home was always filled with his stories that went nowhere, but made the listener feel at peace. He never hid anything from her, at least not before that day. "I have to go on a business trip for a few days, near the Tarahumara region," he had said. Words that seemed normal, but were followed by a life shattered. The last time she saw him was at the fork in the road near the industrial park. Manuel got out of the car, waving lightly as he always did when he left. But that time, he never returned. A week later, there were no calls. Not a single letter. She called his office, they only gave a cold reply. The trip was canceled. There are no records of any business trip. And the police? They just shrugged. He probably left. He's a grown man. No one believed her. No one helped. No one wanted to believe that a man could be swallowed up by the very organization he served. And then began the solitary search. Lucia sold everything: the old piano, the bookshelves, even the wedding dress she had kept in a wooden chest. She switched to working as a night nurse so she could roam around during the day. She went into the forests, as far as Creel and Batopolis, talking to indigenous people, veterans, even smugglers. Some said they had seen a man resembling Manuel living with the Tarahumara. Others spoke of a demented soldier wandering in the mountains. But it all turned to mist, vanishing when she tried to grasp it. 25 years. Each year was a layer of skin shed from her. What remained was a weary Lucia, barely skin and bones, but her eyes still held a waiting light. Now, returning to the old house, she had nothing left but the desire to sell it to scrape by for her final months. The door opened with a long creak. The smell of dust and mildew hit her face like a slap. Cobwebs hung everywhere, and the old belongings lay still, as if waiting for an owner who had long since ceased to return. Each of her steps echoed in the house, making it feel chillingly empty. She began to pack. Books, sweaters, faded photo frames. Everything was stuffed into cardboard boxes. When she removed the bookshelf under the stairs, a board clicked and popped out, revealing a strange hollow. Lucia bent down, her hand trembling as she reached inside. A metal box, tarnished but still sturdy. On it, a scrawled inscription in purple ink. Th. Julio 1982. She froze. Her hands opened the box. Inside was a small cassette tape, the kind that had been obsolete for decades. Lucia sat down on the floor. The cassette lay in her hand like an object from the past returning, silent, unexpected, like a soul that had not found peace. She looked at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "Manuel, have you never really left me?" Lucia stood in the old living room, disoriented, the dim yellow light reflecting off the faded walls. The cassette lay between her hands, as if beating with the last heartbeats of a bygone era. Outside the window, dry winds blew in gusts, whistling through the gaps that had long gone unfilled. The old player was in the corner of the shelf, covered in a thick layer of dust. Lucia brushed it off with her sleeve, each wipe like opening a door back to the past. She inserted the tape into the machine, her hand trembling slightly. A dry click sounded, followed by a long silence before a crackling sound began to echo. "Lucia," a broken, tired voice said. But it was unmistakable. It was Manuel. Not in a dream, not an illusion. His voice was as vivid as if he were sitting right beside her. "I don't know when you'll hear this, or if you'll ever hear it." His breath was ragged. A week ago, they came claiming to be from Defense Cooperation. But they didn't wear name tags, no paperwork, no explanation. Lucia held her breath. Her hand clenched the edge of the chair, her heart beating like when she was young. They made an offer, or rather, an order. "I have to install a signal receiver for Station Santa Cruz. No records, no minutes." They knew my habits, your name, where you work. I asked them, "What is it for?" They said it was for monitoring enemy signals. But you know me, Lucia. I'm not stupid enough to believe that empty talk. A small sound in the tape, perhaps a lighter being flicked. Then Manuel continued, his voice slower, as if weighing each word. "That device, it's not for listening to the enemy. I'm sure it's used to cut signals, interfere, maybe even to monitor civilians. An old friend of mine once mentioned something called a secondary station in La Cumbre. That place is completely isolated. No one but the military goes in or out." Lucia recoiled slightly, as if each word was stabbing her chest. "If you're listening, that means I'm no longer here. Maybe they took me away. Or worse. But the worst thing is not disappearing, it's leaving you living in a lie." Manuel paused. The tape slackened for a moment. When his voice returned, it was quieter, but clearer than ever. "Don't go to the police. Don't trust anyone who wears clean clothes and speaks politely. You have to find the names. La Cumbre, Secondary Station, Ruiz. And if you see anything marked TH, Julio 1982, it's not a coincidence." A sigh long and heavy, like a person giving up on the world. "I don't regret refusing. I only regret leaving you behind without leaving a trace." A long crackle, then the tape stopped. Lucia was silent. Her eyes were red, but tears didn't flow. She sat there for a long time as if her heart had just been released from a stone shell. Something cracked inside her, but not despair, but the wall that had imprisoned her belief for so many years. From her coat pocket, she took a small notebook, the kind she used when she worked as a nurse. Turning to the first blank page, she wrote, "La Cumbre, Secondary Station, Ruiz, TH Julio 1982. Each word was underlined by a trembling but firm hand. She quietly stood up, removed the tape from the machine, placed it back in the metal box, and carefully put it in the inside pocket of her coat. Outside, the wind was stronger. The windows rattled, as if reminding her that time was passing. Lucia stood in the darkness of the room, looking out at the dark square. For the first time in years, she no longer saw silence as an enemy. Because now, silence had also spoken. People often say, "Time heals." But for some wounds, time only makes them bleed deeper until the truth speaks. Lucia was no longer a woman who only knew how to wait. She had heard the voice from the other side, and now she would answer. A week later, Lucia sat quietly in the dusty old reading room of the Chihuahua City Library. In front of her were newspapers yellowed with age, their edges curled up like forgotten memories. The smell of old paper and dust made her nose itch, but she didn't mind. Her fingers ran through each line of text, the reading light reflecting off her glasses. She was looking for a name Ruiz, as if knocking on every door of the past, hoping someone would answer. Finally, it appeared in an article published in 1982, in the local military news section. Lieutenant Anselmo Ruiz, technical engineer, in charge of signal testing at the Sierra Madre Mountain Monitoring Station, spoke at the conference on military communications in high regions. Lucia stopped her eyes for a long time on that name. Not imagination, not coincidence. Manuel had told the truth. The first name from the tape began to unlock time. During her search at the provincial library, Lucia did more than just read newspapers. She also requested to see the military technician yearbook, a document that was once publicly available in defense publications in the 80s, stored in a special reading room. Inside, under the local technical center section in 1982, was the line, Lieutenant Anselmo Ruiz, Signal Engineer/Digital Technical Unit, 47 Contact Address, Calle Fresno, number 114, Colonia Las Lomas. It was something that no one paid attention to in peacetime. Old addresses that seemed to have been forgotten now became vital leads. Lucia recorded it with a firm stroke, not because she believed he would still be there, but because everything started with tracing each old ink mark. The old house was silent, the wooden door loose on its hinges, the rusty nameplate spotted with stains. A. Ruiz. Not a sound of a person. She knocked on the door. No one answered. An elderly woman next door watering plants looked up. "Are you looking for Mr. Ruiz? He moved away a long time ago, around 83 or 84, something like that." The neighbor's voice dragged on, as if each year was a layer of dust. "They said he was demoted. I heard he was involved in something secret. Then he went back to his wife's hometown in Sinaloa." Lucia nodded in thanks, feeling like she had just opened another door, but behind it was a maze. But she didn't give up. The woman managed to add, "I remember he had a younger brother. He repaired radios near the Valle de Allende market." 3 days later, after a silent journey across the province, Lucia stood in front of a small shop with peeling whitewashed walls. A handmade sign read, "Radio y Reparaciones H. Ruiz." Lucia stood before the worn wooden counter next to the radio repair shop, unsure whether she was doing the right thing or just continuing to run into another dead end. Inside was a thin man, about 70, his hair sparse and gray, bent over soldering a circuit on an old circuit board. When she spoke, he didn't look up. "Excuse me, I'm looking for information about someone named Anselmo Ruiz. And another person, Manuel Herrera." The soldering iron hissed, then stopped. He frowned, still not looking at her, his voice curt. "I don't know. I don't work for the government. I'm not involved with soldiers." Lucia was silent for a few seconds. She gently placed a piece of paper on the counter, a copy from the military yearbook where Ruiz's name was recorded with his old address. "I'm not here to cause trouble, but my loved one disappeared in 1983, and I believe Mr. Ruiz knows about it. I just want to know the truth, even if it's just a part of it." The man put down the soldering iron, his eyes glued to the paper. His hand trembled very slightly enough for Lucia to realize that the name Ruiz was no longer unfamiliar to him. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were full of the dust of time. "Manuel Herrera," he repeated, as if speaking from a distant memory. "That name. I remember. He was the only one who refused." Lucia sat down on the old wooden chair, not asking anything more, just waiting. H. Ruiz put down the soldering iron, sighed. "My brother, he used to work at the Santa Cruz monitoring station. I don't know much, but the times he was drunk, he said Santa Cruz was a place where people lost their names. No one called each other by their real names. No one was allowed to leave the station unless ordered from above. There were engineers who were brought there and then disappeared." Lucia was silent. Ruiz looked at her, his voice much lower. "He used to say that only one person dared to refuse an engineer from Chihuahua. Very good. They gave him a choice, serve or disappear. And that person disappeared." "That was my husband," Lucia said softly. "Manuel never left me. They took him." The man pulled out a stack of old papers from the drawer under the table, the edges torn. "I kept this a schematic of the connection of a secondary station. My brother drew it to learn about waves in case of a communication breakdown. Here you see. The paper spread out, drawn by hand with blue ink, the lines scribbled but full of detail. There were 3 stations marked with triangles: SC Santa Cruz, LC La Cumbre, and an unnamed station only marked RXZ. Between the points were radio wave symbols and mountain coordinates. He said La Cumbre was a transit station. People from Santa Cruz were brought there if they were suspected. It's deep in the forest, only accessible by walking. Lucia looked at the paper for a long time, as if facing a map leading to the heart of the truth. Each line, each symbol, was now a clue leading her out of the darkness of 25 years. "Do you still keep in touch with your brother?" she asked. Ruiz shook his head. "I haven't heard anything since 1986. One day he disappeared just like the others." Lucia thanked him, holding the diagram tightly like a treasure. On the way back, she didn't feel tired. The night sky of the Sinaloa Mountains was thick with fog, but in her heart was a flame that had just been lit. There are journeys that don't lead to places but lead to answers. And sometimes, just a piece of paper, a name, is enough to start all over again. As the old truck turned onto the rough red dirt road, Lucia saw the forest ahead rising like a dark green wall, so quiet it was eerie. Teodoro, the indigenous man she hired as a guide, was silent throughout the journey, only glancing at Ruiz's map once, then folding it up very quickly. "Are you sure you want to go up there?" he asked, his eyes unable to hide his fear. "That place used to have soldiers, used to have a checkpoint. People around here call it Silent Mountain because gunshots used to ring out up there, but no one dared to ask. No one dared to investigate that area." Lucia nodded, not out of courage, but because the truth was too deep inside her to turn back. From the drop-off point, the two had to walk for hours. The trail narrowed, tree roots intertwined like fingers wanting to hold back strangers. Each step was a gust of wind across her face, each bird call echoing from a forgotten world. Sweat poured down her back. She clung to the rock face, climbed over fallen trees, her chest throbbing, but she didn't stop. "Here it is," Teodoro said softly, pointing to a gap between 2 ridges, an entrance hidden by wild bushes. Behind it was a cracked concrete wall, covered with moss and vines. In the middle, traces of a metal gate that had been removed, only 2 rusty hinges remained. Lucia stepped forward, her palm placed on the cold wall. In that moment, she felt like she was touching the very truths that had been buried for over 20 years. Not rumors, not imagination, this was real. Santa Cruz had existed. The two entered, stepping over the rubble of a hastily dismantled construction. Broken pieces of antennas lay on the ground, cables half buried in the soil, young saplings sprouting through cracks. There were no signs of humans for many years, but the space still carried the breath of an organization. In the deepest corner, after passing through a collapsed corridor, was a small concrete bunker, its door closed with a steel plate that had been removed from its hinges. Teodoro used a crowbar to remove the tangled vines, and then the two stooped to enter. The smell of mildew and rusty metal assaulted their noses. The space inside was as if time had stopped. The walls were falling, the machines were rusted, the cabinets were tilted. Lucia ran her hand through each shelf, the flashlight beam trembling. At the 3rd shelf, she stopped. A small brass plate lay at the bottom of the cabinet, covered in dust, but still clearly readable with the engraved words, Monsieur Herrera, Cod. 038. She was speechless. Her hands trembled. The plate fell to the floor with a dry clink. This was no longer a hypothesis, no longer a feeling, this was evidence. Manuel had been here, working, living, and perhaps even suffering. "Who was he to you?" Teodoro asked, his voice heavy. "He was my husband, and the one who was taken away as if he never existed." Teodoro nodded slightly, his eyes suddenly softened. "People say that in '83, an engineer disappeared in the station. After that, the soldiers all retreated as if fleeing something. There were rumors that someone died, was buried somewhere on the hill, but no one dared to speak out. Lucia knelt on the floor, her hand touching the shallow engravings on the wall lines that were almost completely faded. No surrender, no retreat. Maybe it was Manuel's, maybe someone else's, but it didn't matter. It said exactly what she felt. This place was a trap, and those who refused had paid the price. She used her phone to photograph everything: the nameplate, the remaining diagrams, the traces of machines. Then, the two returned to the bunker door, the evening light filtering in like a faint ray of hope. Before leaving, she marked the GPS, recorded the coordinates, saved it on 3 devices. "What are you going to do with all this?" Teodoro asked. Lucia clutched the notebook tightly. "I'm going to return, but not alone. There must be someone to witness. This is no longer just about me and Manuel." He nodded. Then the two silently went down the mountain. In her heart, an idea had just formed that for 25 years she had not been looking for a man, but she was tracing the traces of a crime, and now she had reached the edge of the truth. The wooden door of the Human Rights Institute opened slowly. Inside was a bright white space, clean and quiet to the point that no one would have guessed that this place was the beginning of a war bigger than Lucia had ever imagined. Alma, a young woman, dark-skinned, with sharp and dynamic eyes, came out from a small office, her hair tied up neatly behind her neck. She didn't ask Lucia what she needed, only nodded and invited her inside. It seemed that the file Lucia was holding had said everything. After looking at the photos of the nameplate, the station diagram, and the engraving in the bunker, Alma sat up straight, taking detailed notes on a yellow notepad. Not interrupting, not showing any suspicion, only occasionally tapping her pen on the edge of the table as if to verify that she was still hearing what was too much to imagine. "Can you give me the exact coordinates? And—" She paused, looking at Lucia. "Please don't publicize the station name. Anyway, we don't have official permission yet." Lucia nodded. In her heart, trust wasn't easily placed on anyone. But with Alma, the young woman whose eyes didn't waver, she felt that, at least this time, she didn't have to fight alone. 3 days later, Alma called. "I have submitted a preliminary report. The Forensic Institute can grant limited exploration permits if there are reasonable signs. They will request an official excavation order." A first ray of light. But it was from there that the darkness also began to move. The next night, Lucia returned home to find the hallway light still on, something she never forgot to turn off. On her desk, the sticky notes she had marked with the location of the bunker were disturbed. The cassette player was opened, the tape removed from the spool, placed neatly as if a wordless message. "We've seen it." The window of the back room had slight sliding marks, strange footprints in the damp soil. Lucia stood still in the darkness, a fear rising in her that was both cold and slow, like groundwater seeping into the rock face. Late that night, there was a knock on the door. It was Teodoro, his face pale, cold sweat beading around his forehead. He didn't come in, but stood at the door as if the house was no longer safe. "They found me," he said, his voice hoarse. "2 people not wearing military uniforms but asking very strange questions. They wanted to know where I took you. Why, if anyone else knew. I didn't say anything. But you have to be careful. They know more than we think." Lucia only nodded, not asking more. The answer in Teodoro's eyes was enough. He stood silently by the doorframe, clutching his old cloth hat tightly. Before turning away, he said softly, almost only loud enough for her to hear, "This trip is the last time I can help. After today, please don't look for me anymore. Not because I'm afraid, but because if something happens, you need someone who isn't being watched." Lucia didn't object. She watched Teodoro's shadow disappear behind the eucalyptus trees, only whispering, "Thank you. I won't forget." The next day, Alma didn't contact her by phone, but sent a handwritten letter, the lines small and discreet like her. "Dear Lucia, I found a record of engineers who worked in the Santa Cruz station network. Only 4 technical codes exist, and only one person is still alive. His name is unknown, only marked X112. Recorded voluntarily withdrew in 1984, currently unavailable. But I tracked down the old address. There are rumors that this person is living in Eureka, in seclusion. I advise you not to go alone. But if you want to, this may be the last ray of hope. Lucia read the letter over and over. X112. The 4th person. Maybe a witness. Maybe living evidence. Lucia folded the letter, holding it longer than necessary at the last line. The last ray of hope sounded like a fragile thread connected to a deep abyss. But what made her sigh was not the journey, but the familiar warning. I advise you not to go alone. She stood up, put the letter in her coat pocket. Without saying it, she had decided she would go alone. Because if there was anything she had learned from the price of truth, it could not be paid with the lives of others. Not another Alma, not another Teodoro. No one had to bear the pain that only she had caused with her unwavering loyalty to a man who had passed away. All night, she didn't sleep. In the lighted room, she rearranged the documents, photographed the entire file onto 2 different storage devices. One hidden in the painting on the wall. One would be sent to Alma for safekeeping. As the wind whistled outside the porch, she knew it was time to leave. The bus heading towards Eureka began to move when it was still dark. In the swaying compartment, she looked through the window, the streets receding like pages of a book that had been read. Something in her had changed no longer, just a wife looking for her husband's shadow, but a witness to the names that some force had deliberately tried to erase from history. Between the fading darkness, an old saying appeared in her mind, something her father had said, a long time ago. The living are not the stronger, but those who still have a reason to move on. And Lucia, after 25 years of silence, finally found that reason. The road leading into Eureka was as narrow as a thread, torn between 2 towering cliffs. Rocks fell in patches, bushes grew close to the edge, and below was a dizzying abyss with no bottom in sight. The bus stopped at an empty lot where there was no phone signal, only the sound of forest birds and footsteps echoing from mountain to mountain. Lucia walked a long distance to reach the wooden house built by the stream, the corrugated iron roof rusty, smoke lightly rising from the crooked chimney. The door was closed. No dog, no bell, only absolute silence. She knocked twice, then stepped back. After a while, the door opened slightly. An elderly man looked out, his hair white, his skin tanned by the sun, his once sharp eyes now clouded like an old mirror. "I don't receive visitors," he said, his voice deep, not inviting her in. Lucia didn't step forward. She only said slowly, clearly, "I came because of someone named Manuel Herrera." The door didn't close as expected. The man stood still, his chin slightly moving, his distant gaze suddenly becoming present. "That name," he whispered. "I've kept it in my head for 25 years. Octavio Paredes, former systems engineer, had lived in seclusion in Eureka since the 80s. No one knew why he withdrew from society. But now, before Lucia, memories rushed back like water overflowing a dam. Inside the house, the smell of rotten wood and herbal tea lingered. There were no photos hanging, no memories, just a bookshelf, a few old technical drawings arranged neatly. Octavio sat opposite Lucia, his hands clasped together. Santa Cruz was not a communications station as they claimed, he began. It was a monitoring center, collecting civilian signals, analyzing sounds, detecting keywords, blocking signals. To put it bluntly, eavesdropping on the entire northern mountain region. Lucia nodded slightly. Manuel's words on the cassette now had a voice of verification. They called it defense cooperation, but it was actually an intelligence link. The Americans provided equipment, the Mexicans operated it. Engineers were chosen from civilians because there weren't enough technically skilled people in the military. We were forced to either do it or be accused of treason. He paused, pouring water into an earthen cup, his hand slightly trembling. Manuel was the only one who refused to build the voice detection module. He said clearly, "I will not install equipment to monitor innocent people." Ruiz, the officer in charge, went crazy at him. There was a big argument. Then, he disappeared. No one saw him leave the station. Octavio looked directly into Lucia's eyes. They said he was transferred elsewhere. But that night, I secretly saw soldiers carrying a large tarpaulin bag through the window of the technical room, towards the La Cumbre hill. Lucia placed her hand on her chest. It felt like her heart had known for a long time, but didn't dare to confirm. I didn't dare to ask, didn't dare to say, but from that moment, I knew he was no longer, and I am a survivor by keeping silent. The room seemed to freeze. Only the slow turning of the ceiling fan and the wind hitting the crack in the door remained. Lucia said softly, "You can help me. Testify. We have data, coordinates. We just need one more person to confirm." Octavio didn't answer right away. He stood up, went to the bookshelf, took out an old map folded into 4, spread it on the table. Red dots marked along the signal lines. The names of the stations: SC Santa Cruz, LC La Cumbre, RXZ, not identified. "Do you know," he said softly, "all the technical staff at that time, each person only knew one part. They only knew the work of their own, and only of the station they were working on. But after Manuel's case, I searched for more information. Santa Cruz was the center, but La Cumbre was where the experiments were carried out. They didn't just eavesdrop. They analyzed behavior, timbre, voice reaction patterns to test algorithms to identify potential threats." Lucia didn't ask more. Part of her felt that if she heard more, she might not be able to bear it anymore. But another part, stronger, had risen up. "Are you willing to come with me?" she asked. Octavio looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said, "because the truth doesn't save the dead. But if we don't open our mouths, then the living will die in exactly the same ways." Lucia returned as soon as it was dusk, her coat covered in mountain dust and the damp smell of old moss. She knocked on the door of Alma's small office located behind the old warehouse of the Human Rights Institute. Alma had just opened the door before she could say anything. Her eyes narrowed angrily. "You went alone?" she almost blurted out, unable to hide her anger. "I told you to wait for me. It's not just a deserted location, it's evidence. We should have done this according to procedure." Lucia didn't say anything, only opened her bag, took out the notebook containing detailed diagrams, photos of broken antennas, and the brass plate with Manuel's name. Alma was silent. Then her eyes softened. She sighed, sitting down on the edge of the table. "At least, you came back safe, and brought something that no one has been able to do for 25 years, a real trace." Lucia nodded, her voice low. "This time, I'm not just looking for my husband. I think I just found the first evidence of a death that has never been named." Mist covered the trail leading up to La Cumbre, blurring all lines like a curtain that refused to be raised. The excavation team set up a temporary station in a clearing at the foot of the hill. No signs, no cameras, only the sound of shovels quietly, and the eyes of those who knew they were doing something beyond the boundaries that were allowed. Alma wore a thick gray coat, her notebook always close to her chest. 2 forensic technicians were calm, wearing gloves, moving according to the diagrams that Octavio redrew from memory. And Lucia standing furthest away, beside a large rock, her eyes not leaving the soil that was being dug up little by little. Each swing of the shovel was a silent prayer. She no longer demanded a miracle. Only wanted, if Manuel's death was real, then at least it had a form, a place to cry, a day to remember. On the second day, it became windy. Tumbleweeds swept across the hillside. Leaves flew around on the tarpaulins that provided shade. One of the two technicians stopped, waving to Alma. Without needing to say anything, everyone came closer. Under the brown soil mixed with gravel, a piece of thick gray-blue fabric was revealed, old military fabric, rotten but with the original seam still intact. Alma signaled to keep it as is. Then the group dug a few more handbreadths wide. A dry sound, the shovel blade touched something hard. A corner of a pelvic bone was revealed, white-gray like chalk. Next to it was a belt that had rusted, and hanging on the belt, a small tin plate tied with twisted copper wire. Alma used tweezers to pick it up, wiping it gently with an alcohol-soaked cloth. Under the mud, the handwritten inscription was revealed, M.E.H. Julio 1983. Lucia collapsed, not touching the burial pit but hugging herself. The sobs she suppressed only sounded like wind whistling through the cracks in the rocks. All the images, the kitchen with the radio, Manuel's eyes before leaving, the brass nameplate found in the bunker all appeared at the same time. Manuel didn't leave. He didn't betray. He was taken away and buried in the ground, nameless, without a grave. Alma bent down beside her, squeezing her hand tightly. We will take the remains to the Forensic Institute. DNA testing, identity verification. You have the right, and we have the responsibility to name the deceased. Octavio stood silently behind, his eyes half closed, as if saying a silent apology to his old friend. That evening, it became cold quickly. The excavation team packed up their equipment. The remains were placed in a specialized plastic box, covered with white cloth, given a temporary code. The temporary station was set up under a wooden shed, everything arranged neatly, but a feeling of unease had crept into every crack. Lucia sat silently for hours by the remains box. She no longer cried. Her eyes seemed to have run dry, only keeping the image of her husband of the past with a kind of frozen sadness. A technician gave her a cup of hot water. She took it, but didn't drink, only let the warmth spread into her hand, as if holding Manuel's hand one last time. As it neared dawn, Alma discovered a strange detail. On the tin plate, in addition to the handwritten name, there was a second engraving, very faint, only visible under the oblique light. Number 12, possibly a code name for the list of people who were handled. The technician quickly took photos, extracted and analyzed it under a magnifying glass. If true, this confirmed not only Manuel but also a list of other victims who had been planned in advance. Before they could prepare to move the remains, the sound of engines roared from the eastern hillside. A convoy of 3 dust-covered vehicles slid down. Armed men, wearing uniforms without insignia, got out holding guns, their faces cold as stone. The leader lifted his chin. We are representatives of regional security. All items found here are under national supervision. Hand over the remains to us and end this excavation immediately. No one in the group answered. Not a single person moved. The air was thick. Lucia felt the blood drain from her face. But it was Alma who stepped forward, her voice emphasizing each word. If we don't do it, what are you going to do? Continue to shoot us all to silence us as you did 25 years ago? She took out her satellite phone, holding it up for everyone to see. This call is directly connected to the International Human Rights Organization. The signal has been encrypted and recorded. If we disappear, you will no longer be a secret. The gunmen hesitated. The leader looked at Alma, then glanced at Octavio. No one spoke. Finally, he said as if spitting out each word, "You can go this time. But remember, those who play with the truth will pay the price." They turned around, got into the car. The armed group disappeared the way they came, in dust and silence. But the threat still hung in the air, like a knife wound that had not been opened. As night fell again, Octavio came to Lucia, placing his hand on her shoulder. If we continue, there will be no turning back. They let you dig up the bones, but they won't let you take those bones far. Lucia looked up, her eyes determined. Then we have to go before they have time to stop us. She squeezed Alma's hand. Tomorrow, we have to leave the station, get the evidence out of the forest. For the first time in her life, Lucia felt that death was not as scary as letting others be forgotten. No one comes back to life from the earth, she whispered, but justice, if strong enough, can rise from a bone. They succeeded in bringing the remains out of the forest, but the following days were a series of days of waiting for the results, both worried, afraid, but also full of determination. For 14 days in a row, she counted every tick of the clock as a death row inmate counted the steps of the jailer. The forensic laboratory in Ciudad Juarez was silent, as if each DNA cell also needed the approval of some invisible force before revealing itself. She returned to the old house, where every journey began. The smell of damp lime, dust, and memories intertwined in every corner. Not for nostalgia, but for one single reason. The cassette tape had never been fully listened to. The first time she discovered it, she stopped when Manuel instructed her about Ruiz and La Cumbre. But perhaps there was something more after that. The cassette player was wiped clean of dust, the head carefully readjusted. Lucia pressed the play button, her hand trembling, but her eyes firm. The crackling sound at the beginning gave way to Manuel's voice, tired but not afraid. Lucia, if this tape is still playing, it means they haven't destroyed everything. Maybe you're still alive. Maybe you're looking for me. If so, I thank you very much. But don't let love make you forget this. I didn't choose to sacrifice myself. I only chose not to betray the people. The voice paused for a beat, then faded slightly. They want to turn technology into a weapon. They want to turn me and people like me into henchmen without a conscience. You know, the only thing I've never traded is what's right. The tape ran to the end, then stopped completely. A cold click rang out. Lucia didn't move. In her heart, the pain was no longer a constricting spasm, but a profound awakening. She stood up, went to the bookshelf, took the investigation notebook and transcribed verbatim every sentence on the tape, her hand not shaking even a line. No more tears, no more hesitation. Only a quiet fire remained rekindled by the very voice she thought she had lost forever. Then, on the morning of the 15th day after the results were sent, Alma brought a sealed envelope, her hand trembling like someone carrying a death sentence. Inside was the DNA test results, the bright red forensic seal. 100% match, she said. The bone sample matches the hair you provided. Lucia sat down, her hands embracing the envelope, not opening it, not asking more. She didn't need confirmation with numbers. Manuel was there. Now, with this evidence, the government would have to admit it. Alma continued. I requested that the report be made public, but they refused. The files related to Santa Cruz have been transferred to the Ministry of Interior, marked as classified. The reason related to international defense cooperation. Lucia sighed a sigh that didn't carry despair, but only a decision. If the front door was locked, she would knock on the back door. I want to write, she said. Recount everything, not just the truth, but also what I've lived through. Octavio from the table next to her didn't look up. He only nodded slightly, his hand still redrawing the old diagrams with black ink. They will call you a crazy woman, but if you are silent, they will rewrite the story without you, without Manuel, without anyone, and in the way they want. Lucia sat for 3 nights, handwriting an 8-page statement. The letters were uneven, the lines slanted because of shaking, but each line was as if etched into the paper with a heart. She attached photos of the brass nameplate, photos of the excavated body, and both cassette tapes converted to digital audio. One copy was sent to a newspaper in Madrid, one to a human rights magazine in Buenos Aires, and one to an international radio station in New York. She signed the last line with a bold blue ink, Lucia Herrera, wife, witness, survivor. Alma sat opposite her, holding the 3 sealed envelopes, her eyes troubled. Are you sure you want to do this? she asked. Lucia replied softly, her voice unusually calm. I haven't returned from 1983. It's just that now I have to end the journey I've spent half my life on. After signing, Lucia sat quietly by the window for a long time. A light rain began to fall, gently tapping on the tile roof as if reminding her that time didn't stop, no matter how heavy people's hearts were. The yellow light from the kitchen shone on the tiled floor, reminding her of the nights Manuel still fixed the radio, the flickering soldering iron like a small spark of hope. She looked at the 3 envelopes on the table, her heart surging. For the first time in 25 years, she was no longer searching, she was accusing. She was no longer asking, "Where is he?" Zrania, but saying, "They killed him." Not because he was guilty, but because he was fighting for conscience, for what's right. That difference wasn't small, it carried the weight of a war. But then the worst happened. The dim blue neon light flickered on the metal ceiling. Lucia opened her eyes not because she was awake, but because of the smell of burning rust and the panting of someone nearby. Alma was tied up next to her, her face swollen and red. Octavio slumped over, his left shoulder bandaged roughly with his coat. They were in a locked room, no windows, only a single steel door. The 3 had been kidnapped without explanation. Footsteps rang out. The door burst open. A man in military uniform stepped in tall, his back straight as a steel bar. His eyes weren't angry, but contemptuous. He took off his hat, revealing gray hair and a face once accustomed to unquestioned power. "I tried to warn you." His voice was deep, steady. "But you ignored me. You don't understand that you are touching national interests. And so, you will all pay the price." Lucia didn't react, but Alma snapped up, the dried blood on either side of her lips like long cuts of defiance. "You say it's for national interests, but in the end, it's only for your interests. You liars," she hissed, her voice hoarse but sharp as a knife. The general faltered for a beat, then laughed, the laughter dry, cold as metal. "The mouth of a woman," he snarled, "doesn't know who she's talking to." Then suddenly he swung his hand. The slap sounded like a gunshot in the locked room. Alma fell into the wall, her cheek bearing the imprint of 5 swollen red fingers. That dry sound echoed in Lucia's chest like a thunderbolt. She struggled, trying to crawl closer, her knees hitting the cold concrete floor. Tears welled up uncontrollably. "Don't hit her! Don't do that!" Lucia whispered, then sobbed in fits. "It's my fault. I dragged her into it. I believed I could do this alone." Alma turned her head, blood welling in the corner of her mouth, but still tried to smile a distorted but courageous smile. "You didn't drag me in," she said softly. "I chose to go with you. For the truth. For Manuel." Octavio, still tied to the chair, his eyes blurry with tears, gritted his teeth until they bled. "You dogs," he hissed, his voice broken by helplessness. "Even if you kill us, this will not disappear anymore." Lucia reached out, lightly touching Alma's cold hand. In those old eyes was a mountain of pain, not for herself, but for letting someone else suffer in her place. But also in it shone something that didn't die: will. The general turned back, pulled the pistol from his belt, cocked it with a practiced motion. "Think you're heroes? All of you will pay." He turned to the guards, his eyes not blinking. "Shoot them. All 3, immediately." Right then, thud, the entire system flashed blindingly. Emergency lights flashed red, warning sounds echoed, and the situation reversed. Siren wails resounded, then the clang of metal against metal. The room lights went out, leaving only the flashing red lights from the emergency system. An electronic voice rang out completely different. "Automatic signal activation confirmed. Human Rights Protocol activated. All data has been sent to the International Human Rights Federation. Intervention forces are approaching." The general stopped, turning sharply. Alma sneered, tired but still defiant. I installed that mechanism a long time ago. If the computer in the office isn't opened in 24 hours, the system will send all the evidence. And yesterday, I turned it off. The door was broken down. National security forces, not the general's faction, flooded in. The general was subdued, handcuffed. As he passed Lucia, she only looked not hatred, not fear, just the gaze of someone who had brought darkness into the light. The cold wind brought Lucia to the San Felipe cemetery as dusk approached. Rows of white tombstones stood silently, each grave like a story untold. She walked to the center, where the excavation team had filled in the newly dug grave. Manuel Herrera Ramirez's tombstone stood alone in a small area, quiet but not lonely. But before that, on the morning of the same day, all three had been present at a special military court where the general who had ordered Manuel Herrera's execution was brought to public trial. The public seats weren't crowded, but went silent before each testimony, each piece of evidence presented. The recordings, documents, witnesses, all could no longer be denied. The final verdict rang out 15 years in prison for commanding the concealment of murder, abuse of power, and destruction of evidence. The courtroom didn't applaud. No one cheered, only a deep silence, like earth closing after a tremor. After the trial, a man in a general's uniform approached. He had retired, but his face still carried the coldness of someone who had been on the front lines, only different. Those eyes were warmer. "I'm Benitez," he said, shaking hands with each person. "I've been pursuing this for 10 years, but didn't have enough evidence to reopen it." "You did what the whole system tried to bury." Octavio bowed slightly, his eyes unable to hide his surprise. Alma smiled slightly, the scar at the corner of her mouth not yet healed. Lucia only looked directly at the man, not saying anything, but her eyes shone with silent gratitude and a very strange feeling. Seeing kindness from the very place that had taken everything from her. "It's the silent ones who are scary," the general continued. "But you are the conscience." On the way to the cemetery, no one said much. Each person silently hugged their memories like holding a hot ember. But in the car, as the sun slanted down the window, Alma turned to Lucia and said softly, "I used to think I would die because of this. But now I think I got to live because of it." Octavio chuckled softly. "Me too. Although I'm not sure I have the guts of this girl." Lucia didn't say anything, but in her hand, the bag containing Manuel's ashes was hugged with both arms like a part of her body lost and just found again. The funeral had no speeches, no extravagant rituals. Everyone stood silently, as if reserving the solemnity for a final period. Lucia sat in the front row, holding the remains box as if holding on to what had once been herself. She didn't whisper any words, but her eyes shone the light of someone who had found something unaccepted for so many years of pain. Candlelight flickered in the wind, falling long on the tombstone. The inscription, Manuel Herrera Ramirez, 1953-1983. He returned with his name. And the truth also returned with him. Lucia stared at the inscription, feeling like every rain of remembrance had reached her eyelashes. Every day of disappointment, every letter sent in vain, now turned into milestones leading to a small justice, enough to lift a person's name back from the darkness. Reporters from Madrid, Buenos Aires, New York, stood in the back, their eyes attentive, cameras recording. Images of the engineer who refused the civilian surveillance program flooded the international press, shifting the context from a personal matter to a symbol against abuse of power. But the funeral still maintained a reverent silence that could not be bought with media. Octavio gently placed a signal detection module on the grave, the remainder of the technical draft of the device that Manuel had designed. The device was now broken, but the trace conveyed a message clearer than any words. He was not just an engineer. He was someone who refused to be controlled. After placing the device, Lucia bowed her head and gently leaned her eyes on the tombstone. In her heart, she was no longer weighed down by loss. Instead, there was a feeling of peace, as if part of Manuel's soul had been returned to his name, returned to his place among those who loved him and justice. As the ceremony ended, it was completely dark. Moonlight shone faint streaks. Lucia quietly walked to the gravesite, placing a small piece of copper wire, a remnant from her husband's engineer life, rolled up as a discreet final greeting. Beside it, Lucia gently wrote a handwritten letter for the first time. "You didn't come back as I hoped, but you didn't vanish. I'm not waiting anymore, and I will tell your story." Those lines were trembling but sincere, as if for the first time she could speak to her husband with the most transparent truth. The letter was carefully folded, placed in the grave along with the wire and the module, as if to send with him the words that hadn't been spoken. In the distance, the sound of gravel footsteps rang out. Alma and Octavio came to her side. The three quietly held hands, without words. The media still gathered outside, the news report sketching the portrait of Lucia, a woman who refused to be silent, turning pain into a weapon. Local authorities had spoken out in response, saying that Santa Cruz was only a technical project and the deaths were unrelated. But now, when people saw the tombstone, when DNA had proven it, when the signal detection module lay on the tombstone, all refutations became minor. Lucia didn't cry. She looked up at the sky, where the moon lightly glided through the night. In her heart, a fighting spirit had just revived, closing the journey of waiting, opening the journey of exposing. Surely you have been silent, not because you didn't know the truth, but because no one wanted to listen, or you were afraid to carry it alone. A year later, Lucia's small apartment was on the second floor of an old building near the city park. She didn't move anywhere despite many invitations, even from international organizations, because she believed one should not abandon the place where memories have taken root. Every morning, she woke up to the sound of sparrows perched on the windowsill. She brewed a pot of strong coffee, placed a few sprigs of wild flowers picked by the ditch in a cracked porcelain vase, and sat down to write not a memoir, but scattered notes about electrical engineering, about types of waves, about Manuel's unfinished dreams. That was how she kept him alive, not in tears, but in lines of text. Alma occasionally came to visit, bringing printed newspapers or new news from the student group. Someone was starting a project to create a small museum about Mexico's first human rights engineer. Octavio sent letters from afar, still living quietly in the mountains, but now he painted memory maps of Station Santa Cruz in light watercolors and recycled paper. Lucia didn't give speeches, didn't give interviews anymore. But if anyone asked her about the case, she always opened the wooden cabinet, took out the old cassette. "If you have enough patience to listen to the voice of the dead," she said, "you will understand why the living must speak out." One afternoon, in the small courtyard, she planted a new cactus bush next to the old lavender bush. As the last rays of the sun dyed the steps golden, Lucia stood still for a moment, then said softly, "I'm still here, Manuel. Not to wait, but to keep the flame until someone needs the light." And that light still continued to burn, small, but lasting, in the corner of the room, on the tombstone, in the heart of a woman who had gone through hell, but had never lost her humanity. If you have read this far, perhaps you also carry a wound, maybe about someone who has been lost, something unnamed, or a right that was suffocated between threats. The story of Lucia and Manuel is not only about love that was taken away, but the enduring journey to reclaim the truth in a world that once wanted to bury it. We retell this story based on real cases investigated over many years, from many sources of documents and witness accounts. The names of characters, locations, and some details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. But its spirit, the indomitable spirit, the pain, and the courage, is completely true. If this story makes you silent, please share it via WhatsApp with a trusted friend. Maybe they were forced to forget, were afraid to speak out, or had a loss without a chance to name it. Sometimes, just a story is enough to let someone know they are not alone. We cannot take back time, but we can give back honor, justice, and a voice to those who have been robbed. Send this story. Who knows, somewhere, there is someone waiting to know that the truth can still be heard, and they are not just victims, but the last witnesses.